Whenever I recall the past, it seems to me as if I am now existing in another world. I say that the free men of the North today are 1,000 times blessed in every respect. For in the time of my youth, we knew nothing of the vast, burning kingdoms of the South, nor the price one pays to see them. It was in the year of our Lord 873, I believe, though their calendar was a different thing entirely, that I was taken from the world I knew. I was living in Hidibi, a bustling port with a scent of tar and pine mingled with the salt wind, just when the hunger for silver and adventure pulled our longships ever farther from known shores. There were two kinds of men in that place, those who sought fortune in the West, in England and Francia, and those whose eyes turned east, down the great river roads. I belonged to the latter. The Dnieper, the Volga, these were our highways. But a highway, as I learned, can lead two ways. It can carry you to the markets of Miklagard, gleaming with gold, or it can deliver you bound and nameless to the hands of the Khazars or the Rose, who see only the muscle in your back and the value it might bring to a foreign master. So there were very few who dared venture deep into those river networks without a company of trusted swords, for fear they would be taken and sold for doing so. As it was then a season of poor raiding in the West, the call of the East grew stronger. It was necessary for us to disguise our intentions not as raiders, but as traders carrying furs and amber, and not to fly our shields from the gunwales when approaching the Volga-Bulgar markets. We put up at a trading camp on the riverbank. In the meantime, we had often gone out to barter amongst the Bulgar tents and the strange, quiet men from the south. To tell the truth, the camp was not so prosperous as we had heard. There were only a few Arab silver coins to be found for a mountain of good pelts, though we had to conduct ourselves with open hands and smiling faces. Yet we could not fully understand the prayers they chanted to their one God, nor the way they measured the sun's passage. We could not find any better provisions than dried mutton and a kind of thin, hard bread, such as is demanded by desert men only. We could not, in the end, find safety. Then, as we had not yet secured the silver we came for, no wonder we appeared quite tempting, both to the Bulgar guards and the wandering bands of slavers who watched from the tree line. When we wore our mail and gripped our axes, we felt the weight of their gazes. Although our ancestors had faced peril on every sea, I may safely say that we set the first and final example to ourselves of trusting a river knight's peace. It gave a very strange feeling when the first arrow took my brother in the throat. At the same time, we felt very much embarrassed, as men who have been made fools, when they emerged from the darkness not for our goods, but for us. A few of my crew who were not killed in that first rush were, by cruel fortune, found alive in the morning. To mention their names now is to speak their death song. Bjorn, son of Erland, still living in my memory, the late Kettle who could mend any sail, the late Gunnar who sang so well, and the late young Egil who had not yet grown his first beard. So we were 5. Sad to say, I was something like a chieftain without a ship, having had no power to prevent our fate, while the 4 others looked to me for a plan that would not come. In attempting to reason with our captors, there had arisen a difficulty, for they spoke a tongue of grunts and gestures, and the man who could understand a little of our speech merely laughed. I was told by him, through a broken chain of words, that it was too late for me to attempt anything, owing to the unrest existing along the river routes. But I was trying my best to watch for a moment, any moment, and I was not disappointed. Bjorn and the others held their silence, their eyes holding the fury of a stalled wave. We were very few who would survive the journey south, but at present, those who are taken are bound in iron, not hemp, and travel in the holds of broad, stinking ships or in stumbling caravans. What a pitiable condition of affairs it is when compared with the freedom of our fjords. And important works of man-great walls of baked brick, towers that scrape the sky, and an endless variety of goods and spices are seen only through the eyes of a beast of burden, so that they can comprehend nothing but the lash and the weight of the chain. We had only the names of distant places: Baghdad. Samarra whispered like curses before we went south, as there were very few who had returned from such places to tell of them. As we were then obliged to take a river barge, we had of course to be sold to a new master. There was one known among the slavers as the Rahal, the traveler, a Persian with eyes like black flint. As I was the largest and least broken of the lot, I was examined directly by him. My application for death being readily denied, I was priced at 37 silver dirhams. The money which exchanged hands was counted with care, but enough to seal a fate which the journey south would make clear. As it was nearing the time of their midday prayer, the Persian came to inspect us where we sat in filth, and gave us a flat warning, saying that it was quite lawful for him to kill any one of us who caused trouble, for we were strictly forbidden to speak to look a free man in the eye, or to pray to our own gods. He added that he could not guarantee whether or not we would survive the heat of the Dasht-i-Kavir, the great salt desert which lay ahead. Then I was greatly heartened, and said within my own heart, if we do not find a way, we are ruined and forgotten. So much so that we have no alternative but to live through this, because if we die here, our names will never reach the ears of our people, and our spirits will wander in this sun-blistered waste. So we had better cling to life at this moment, and be brought to some city, making a sorry, broken column, and be worked to death under a foreign sun. Just at the moment, when all of us were closing our eyes against the despair, the Persian in question cracked his whip against the cart and said, "Move," and we moved. As soon as we had safely entered the furnace of the desert, some of the other slaves, Nubians and Franks, began to die from the thirst. An Arab guard, who was once a soldier in the Caliph's army, came to our line to pour a little water into our mouths, and I was very careful to watch his hands, the way he wore his knife, the looseness of his sandal strap. The next morning, I was taken from the line to help dig a grave for the dead. After that, I appeared like a man of use. To tell the truth, I was not soon able to understand the vastness of this land, though one day a guard who was chewing a date spat and asked me where my native place was. "North," I responded, and he asked again whether the north was not the same as the land of the Rus, where savage men sailed in wooden boats. Being surprised to hear our name in this place, I nodded, and he laughed and said that the Caliph in Samarra paid well for strong backs from the north, for his new palaces and canals. Before this, I had been shown nothing but the inside of a slave pen, the dust of the road, the raw flesh on our ankles. Spending many days in this way, the terrible power of this empire was thus vividly pressed into my mind. I therefore thought that my people, in their longships, were blindly sailing their own seas, without considering fully the scale of the world. It was quite plain that our gods, the Jir, did not walk here. The sun itself was a different god, cruel and relentless. Should I ever speak of Odin here, I would be met only with blank stares or the back of a hand. Thereon, Bjorn and I, with a look, thought that it was not necessary for us to speak of escape while the desert was before us. So we made up our minds to endure, to become like stones, in order that we might be instrumental in surviving this trial, even at the cost of our pride. When I first stepped into Samarra, the new capital, I was struck dumb by the sight. A guard shoved me and said I should lower my eyes, that I couldn't look upon the grandeur meant for free men. But seeing the towers, the banners of green and gold, the crowds and robes of colors I had no names for, my heart sank. And just like that, I was led to the slave market. We were put on the block in a stone square, kept away from the public eye so our near-death state wouldn't lower our value. There was a huge excitement in the city. The Caliph's new construction project demanded slaves from every corner of the earth. Powerful Ethiopians, sullen Slavs, clever Greeks. All of us armed with nothing but silence, our chains having left their marks upon us. I wore the filth of the desert road, with no cloak, no knife, and my hair matted with the dust of 2,000 miles. Fortunately, a builder of canals needed labor. With his coins, I was transformed from a man of the north into a number, a back for lifting bricks. That evening, we arrived at the work camp and were given a bowl of lentils. The next morning, I met a Frankish man who'd been there a year. I asked him to tell me about the city, about the river Tigris, even if it made my new life harder to bear. He sympathized with my lost spirit. He said he would tell me what I wished to know, and that in knowing, I might find a thread to follow. And so, as we moved clay, he spoke in broken phrases. He told me about the river's flow, the guards' rotations, the chaos of the night markets, and the caravans that left for the north and west. From the worksite, we could see the great round dome of the Caliph's palace, which helped us a lot with direction. He also told me what he'd heard of the marshlands to the south, the tribes who owed no allegiance to the Caliph, and the ships that sailed from Basra to the Indian Ocean. If I wanted to flee, it wouldn't be a matter of strength, but of becoming like smoke, unseen. We tried to memorize the patterns of the moon and the calls of the night watch. A slave might get one chance instead of a life of endless numbered days. But the work on the canal was taking its toll. The overseer suspected the Frank and I were sharing more than just labor, so he decided to separate us. The Frank was distressed. He said, "We spoke of freedom to keep our minds alive, but now our chance is in danger. It's better we forget what was said than have you taste the whip for my words." I replied that we would surely die here in this ditch anyway. It was better to hold on to the knowledge we had and wait for a night, if it ever came, than to surrender our last possession. Luckily, it didn't come to that. The overseer sold the Frank to a different master the next week. Among the slaves in that camp, there was no single opinion. The strong were worked until they broke. The clever were sold to houses. But some men still held the fire of home in their eyes. No day of labor ended without a whispered plan, a dream of rivers flowing north. It was hard to make a pact with hope. Meanwhile, my body grew harder, but my spirit grew quieter. The constant labor, the result of 1,000 years of empire, built on the backs of the conquered, was draining the free man within me of all his old vigor and rage. At last, I was forced to bow my head, not in submission, but in study. My despair turned into a cold, patient watchfulness. Before the night I fled, my name was different. The Arabs called me Ifranji, the Persians called me Varang, and my master named me Kadin, the servant. I learned the rhythm of their inattention. Once, when called to move a pile of stone, I didn't answer until the third call. I believe it was the 11th night of the moon's cycle when the opportunity came. The guard's post was empty. A boy slept against the wall in his place. The camp dogs were silent, drawn away by the scent of a kitchen. The city was full of night sounds, and my heart was pounding. The plan was recognized by my feet before my mind had fully consented. There was no time for doubt. For a moment, I was the master of my own fate. In the dark of that night, the slave line became a memory, and I became a shadow in the alleyways. But escaping was hard. The city itself, the very stones, seemed to perceive my foreignness. Some city guards, the shurta, were out looking for drunks or thieves, but they didn't see me. I think they were afraid of the paperwork for a runaway slave, a tedious affair. I and the spirit of my father moved from shadow to shadow, making our way to the reeds of the Tigris. Every rustle, every cough from the night was a terror. I had no knowledge of the river's currents, only the stories from the Frank and what I could see. I felt my way along the muddy bank, searching for a small fisherman's boat. I learned the patterns of the patrol boats, the lanterns of pleasure barges, the system of the docks, the calls of night birds. I also drank deeply from the river, which restored some of my strength. I decided to let the current take me south, to put distance between me and the search that would come at dawn. In the gray light before sunrise, I turned the boat toward the western bank to begin my journey across land. This attempt was exceedingly hard. The only help I had came from the forgotten gods of my people, the memory of my brother's face, and the cold wisdom of a fox. In the sagas of the North, they tell of heroes who did great deeds for their clan. A saga is useful for remembering, but very few have been written by a slave in the dark of a foreign land. So I had to adopt the cunning of a rabbit and the patience of a stone, and I felt a strange shame for it. Then came the desert, a rapid succession of desperate days and freezing nights. It awoke me to the mighty emptiness of the world. I felt the touch of an indifferent expanse that would draw the life from me if I didn't become a creature of the dust. I had to confess, I was ill-prepared for such loneliness. The whole man I had been, the raider, the traitor, the captive with his defiant glare, had to be uprooted and destroyed. His obsolete pride and familiar enjay were a hindrance. But don't get the common idea that there was no cunning, no Northman spirit during those days of flight. It's a false impression that survival is just a matter of strength. People think my escape was just a series of fortunate accidents. On the contrary, for every step of that journey, I was guided by an education of the highest type, necessity. It gave me splendid standards of observation, rigorously enforced. I had to see the hawk before it saw me, find water before thirst found me. The result, as anyone who has been truly lost knows, was an education that aimed for silent movement, a beast's simplicity, and a self-preserving spirit like a wolf's. I learned the navigational wit of the far-traveled crow. My mind trained my fears into a single sharp point. I learned to see beyond the next dune, to read the stars as my map. I became as interested in the affairs of the ant and the scorpion as I once was in empires and caliphs. And now, looking back over the decades, I feel a cold gratitude. The experiment of my life has been, despite its scars, a success. I believe that even the deepest memory of pain feels the importance of the moments when a man chooses to keep breathing. That long, hidden undertaking was both a personal affair and an affair in which every man who has ever been broken is interested. The strong, focused will that pushed one foot in front of the other in that supreme moment would not have been possible without the active participation of my entire being in its own survival. In a state of absolute desolation, where the only government was the will, and the only constitution was written in the dust by one trembling finger pointing north. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe for more tales of history and the human spirit.